Hello and welcome, 8th graders in my Global Studies class. I am Mr. Merrigan, and welcome all learners. I just wanted to have a component video here to kind of go along with what we were doing in class and encourage anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about global studies or geography to join us. And again, welcome to another Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography. Today we're going to focus on Canada, and in particular in this first video, we are going to take a look at the physical features of Canada's provinces and territories, along with identifying those. That'll be helpful for your upcoming map quiz. Also, we're going to identify and explain the industries of the economic regions of Canada. So all of those will be very helpful, and that is going to be the focus of what we're going to do today. Just a little bit of background information. If you're looking for a really cool visual, 8th graders, in your textbook on page 158, there is a visual of Banff National Park, and I highly encourage you to follow the link here, and I will make sure that I put the notes in the description as well, as you can also find those on Google Classroom. Beautiful, beautiful national park. Highly encourage you, if that is something that you're interested in, to check out Banff. It's definitely on my list of places to go. It gets over 4 million visitors every year. And Canada is the world's second largest country by total land area. The first one is Russia. And the United States ranks in there in the top 5. One of the things to note, and I highly encourage you to follow the link here below, is the difference between a province and a territory. So Canada is made up of 10 provinces, and you can kind of think about those like states. Certainly there's a federal government in Canada, and we'll get more into the government side of this, of Canada, in our next video, which focuses a little bit more on the culture of Canada. But there's also 3 territories. Highly encourage you to follow the link to discover the difference. But essentially what it comes down to is the territories are run by the federal government, whereas the provinces have a lot more power at the local level or at the provincial level, or the level of the province itself. So when we're looking at those 10 provinces, we have our far eastern provinces, which would include Newfoundland and Labrador, and we also have our maritime provinces, which is Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and New Brunswick. Quebec and Ontario are the provinces that border along the Great Lakes, and our prairie provinces, which would often have similar physical features to the Great Plains of the United States, would include Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And then rounding off our 10th province is British Columbia, which will look a lot like the Pacific Northwest as far as physical geography in the United States. So when we're looking at total area, a couple of the abbreviations in here we haven't talked about. We'll talk about the territories here in just a second, but you can see that Nunavut and the Northwest Territories make up almost over a third. I mean, we're talking about over a third of the of the total land area in Canada. And when we look at the map of Canada, this will make a lot of sense. But certainly Quebec also very large. The majority of people in Canada do live within 150 miles of the Canadian border to the United States. So that's important to note when we're talking about populations. And we'll get more into that in our next video. So looking at these, you can see your 3 prairie provinces. And again, as far as thinking about Minnesota, we border with Ontario. And we'll get into that one here in a little bit. But you can see where the maritime provinces are here to the east and certainly to the west. We can see our 3 territories, as well as the majority of our prairie, as well as British Columbia. So our 3 territories are the Yukon Territory, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. Nunavut was established in 1999 as a homeland for the Inuit people. It had formerly just been part of the Northwest Territories. So before 1999, it was just the Yukon Territory as well as the Northwest Territories. But in order to kind of pay more homage and honor the contributions of the Inuit people and their importance in Canadian life and Canadian culture, Nunavut was dedicated in 1999. Also encourage you to check out this short little link. Talks a little bit about why getting something as simple as groceries, if you live in one of the 3 territories, is very expensive. When we're talking about the physical geography of Canada, one of the things that's really important, very similar actually to the Great Plains in the United States, is the effects of glaciers. And glaciers have really helped to shape a lot of Canada's landscape, including what we often refer to in physical geography terms as the Canadian Shield, which, if we go back to the map, the Canadian Shield is located here around our Hudson Bay. And so this is territory that is very rich in iron. It's very rich in things like copper and nickel and gold, as well as uranium. And it tends to have a little bit more of that prairie-esque look. And a lot of that is because of the glacial activity in Canada. Southern Canada, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and this is where the majority of people live. In the southeastern Atlantic coast, you'll see the Appalachian Mountains. Again, just like we talked about in the eastern United States, along with the Laurentian Highlands, so a little bit more mountainous area. Also in the southeast, you'll see the St. Lawrence River connecting the Great Lakes. Just like this is important in the United States, it's also important to this region in Canada. You'll also see the Great Plains, and certainly you're going to see a lot of commonality between this region along with the Rocky Mountains as you would to the United States. You also have the coastal mountains, which would form along Canada's Pacific shoreline, so largely around the province of British Columbia. And within those coastal mountains, you'll see some different subgroups. Those subgroups are called the St. Elias or Elias Mountains. I'm not entirely sure on the pronunciation there. And those go along the border between Alaska and Yukon Territory. One physical feature to note too is Mount Logan. Mount Logan is the highest peak in Canada. It's 19,551 feet high. And so when we're comparing that to, say, Mount Denali in Alaska, you'll notice that the height are fairly similar. And again, that's for a lot of those reasons that we talked about, the differences in the height in mountains like we talked about in the United States. A lot of that can deal with glacial activity. All right, so shifting gears to that second learning target, getting more into the economic region. So just like the United States, Canada is certainly a free market economy. And it is a mixed economy, much like the United States. It's a little bit more of a mixture of a command economy along with a market economy. And certainly has that relationship like we talked about it with the U.S. in NAFTA, or as the current administration is working through trying to pass what's called the USMCA. And again, we have kind of gone into more depth on that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that right now. But certainly these two countries trade a tremendous amount with each other. In fact, the U.S. imports more oil from Canada than any other state. So highly encourage you to check out the link here to also learn a little bit more about that trade relationship. So looking at Canada's economic regions, manufacturing and farming, as well as the service industries, are going to be major activities. So you're going to see there's certainly a lot of commonality there between the United States and Canada. In Eastern Canada, fishing is a very big one. The Grand Banks area, particularly Atlantic cod, is a very important. You'll also see this certainly in Western Canada too, but we're going to be talking about kind of different kind of fishing. So this would be like Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is a major shipping area and certainly is very well connected into the Atlantic as well. And so kind of thinking about this, see if you can figure out why Grand Banks would be such a great place for fishing, especially for cod fishing. Hint, look at the picture to help you figure it out. So Quebec, which is predominantly a French-speaking province, it is also the largest province as far as total land goes. And manufacturing and service industries are very important here. We'll get into a little bit more about Quebec's interesting history in the next video. They have tried to become a sovereign nation before, similar to a variety of different places that we'll talk about regionally throughout the world. Montreal is also a very important city in Quebec, and it is a very important port on the St. Lawrence River. And again, the St. Lawrence Seaway, along with the Great Lakes, is a very important waterway for shipping between the U.S. and Canada, but also within Canada itself. Ontario is the second largest province, and it has the greatest wealth of all the provinces, and a lot of this is due to manufacturing and the farming that exists. So again, Ontario being among our prairie provinces, and Toronto, which is one of the largest cities in Canada, also is the center for banking and finance. So it has a very similar importance to, say, like New York City in the United States, but just not on as high a level. And Toronto is also a great place for an adrenaline fix, so check out that link as well if you're curious about that. The prairie provinces also have a lot of ranching and a lot of farming. They're also very rich in energy sources, including oil. There's a couple of logos here. See if you can figure out what these are from. We'll talk a little bit more about these two sports in our next video. British Columbia is also very well known for its logging. It's one of the world leaders in newsprint and offering those resources to places around the world. All right, that is going to conclude our first video here. I tried to go through this relatively quickly. Feel free to stop and pause. Check out the guided notes too. And 8th graders, please make sure that you're using those in preparation for your quiz. If you kind of just want to see how you were able to retain the information, I highly encourage you to take the check-in quiz just as a way of checking your learning. And don't worry about the extra credit. But if you want one, see me in class and I'd be happy to think of one for you. Otherwise, thank you for joining me, and 8th graders, please make sure that if you have any questions, you ask me in class. Thank you and have a wonderful day.